All right, we're about ready to start our last session, so be thinking of questions. I'm going to start off with the group, and I've got a couple of questions I have for them. One of the things that I would like to know is this. What advice would you give to a high school student today? Any of you?
John.
Okay. John?
First, I'd like for him to turn this microphone on. That'd be my first advice.
That was intentional.
Yeah, thank you. I guess it would be to aim high, to think of the great things that you can do. I like to put it this way. Aim high, you'll probably miss what you're aiming at, but you'll hit something up high. If you aim low, you'll probably miss what you're aiming at, but you'll hit something down low. As long as you're going to miss what you're aiming at, you might as well hit something up high. So think great thoughts. Think about the best scenarios, and pursue them, and ask people for help. I think the three most important words in the English language are, I need help. And it may be that those are biblical. I think that's what do the Beatitudes start out with? Blessed are the meek. I think that means people who don't think they've got it all together all by themselves. See, if you say, I need help, those are good words. I think it's biblical, and I think it's the best way to get to do great things. Now, if you don't want to do great things, aim low. But God help you. Aspire to greatness.
So as a follow-up to that, we've got some in the audience who are seniors who are getting ready to graduate in the spring. Would your advice to them change at all as they're worried about careers, they're worried about families, they're worried about relationships, they're leaving college? What would change in your advice to a senior getting ready to walk out the door?
Is this for me?
Sure, anyone. Yeah.
Well, take advantage of opportunities, I would say, and I wouldn't, especially as much mobility as there is in our culture, give things a try. If you've got if a door opens and it's an honorable door and it's something you think you might like to do, give it a shot. And I certainly never anticipated being a politician. I taught for 5.5 years at State University, and I don't regret having done it. It was something that the door opened for me, and I thought, well, maybe I'll give this my best effort, and I did. I didn't shirk. I think the key is to give your best effort at whatever you do, and you don't have to have something that's going to be necessarily a life responsibility. I happen to know about you. You got involved in a variety of things, law enforcement and management of a variety of kinds of things before you became a college president. I think go through a few open doors and give it your best shot and see what happens. I think sometimes that's the way that God calls us.
I think, Bob, were you going to say something?
I think it's important to don't be afraid to take some risk. When I graduated from here, David Wilkerson asked me to come and be with him in New York City to work with teen gangs and drug addicts. And he wanted me to travel and speak and tell about that program. And I mean, nobody had done that. He was asking me to do something to pioneer. And I was a little bit, I thought, wow, I don't know how to do this. So don't be afraid to take some risk, because the reality is if it doesn't work out for some reason, you have a lot of time in front of you. And some people think, well, I'm going to do this. This is what I'll be doing the rest of my life. Probably not so. So don't be afraid to take some risk.
I'd like to hitchhike on that, because we live in a culture where there's so much angst. There's so much, I don't know what's going to happen. And I don't know why there might be more anxiety in this culture than there was in my parents' culture. My my mom was born in 1910, and when she was 4, the Great War to End All Wars started, First World War. And then there was the pandemic with what they call the Spanish flu. And then there was the stock market crash, and then there was the Great Depression, and then there was World War II. So I think that would cause me angst. Part of the angst is the options are so many for younger people today. My observation with grandchildren, and we have several in college and several in high school, is that we are paralyzed by options. And this business of taking risk is really key. And the thought about do something, start somewhere. I ask folks as a freshman, so have you any thoughts about majors? And they say, well, and I say, that's a good answer. I used to do what you're doing now, except you're doing it better than I did it. At a college out in California, we used to joke that students change their majors 11 times by their junior year. Well, that's what you're supposed to do.
I changed mine 6.
See, there you go. So,
I never changed my major.
That doesn't surprise me.
I mean, if you had to change your major, you could have really done something with your life.
Yeah, I could have.
Anyway, I just think this business it isn't about being flippant. And for the professors here who say, oh boy, some dude gets up there and says, don't change it, or change your major 11 times. I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is that this opportunity the point about a freeing arts education is that it's supposed to free you to have a perspective on the world and where you might land. Years ago, we have a mutual friend who ran the Navy. And one day, Admiral Clark said, have you ever been on an aircraft carrier? And I said, when I was that 17-year-old and I went on the USS Ranger at Alameda Naval Air Station in California. He said, no. Have you ever been on one at sea? I said, I haven't been on one. He said, we need to fix that. And so 3 or 4 friends, Bob, were you with me? And we get on what they call a COD. It's a twin prop plane in Norfolk Air Force Base, Navy base. And we fly 100 miles off the coast of California. It's like Top Gun. And we land at 180 miles an hour on the deck of the USS George Washington. And you stop in 2 seconds. Your eyeballs are falling out. And we get out and we go in and we end up having dinner with the captain and all these officers, and I'm sitting next to a guy and he flies F-18s, just like Tom Cruise in Top Gun. And I said, so how did you come to fly F-18s? What was your undergraduate degree? He said, I was a history major. I said, how do you get from history to flying F-18? It's a long story. But all I'm saying is that wherever you start, it's not where you're going to end usually. It's just, anyway, that's it.
Well, we've started this process of breaking the ice and asking questions. If you have questions for anybody up here, come on up to the mics. We've got 2 mics here. If somebody's up here, just stand behind them. And when we see people up here, we'll break away from our questions and give you a chance to ask your questions. So right now, who's going to be the first brave soul to come up to the microphone? Come on. Come on up and ask something. And go ahead. We've got another mic. Come on up and start lining up. Go ahead. First, tell us your name, where you're from. Give us a little bit about you.
My name is Leah. Oh, that's way loud.
You're okay.
My name is Leah. I am 17 and I'm a senior. I am dual enrolled with TFC and will be getting my associates here this coming up May. I am from Decatur, Georgia. And one of my big questions for you 3 is you mentioned a lot about perspective and how our perspective really does matter. And I was wondering who has changed your perspective, whether that is a faith journey perspective or whether that's an academic perspective? Who has been that influential person to change your perspective?
Who would you like that question to go to?
It can be all 3 of you, either one. It really doesn't matter. I'm kind of curious about all 3 if possible.
Bob, you started with the changing perspective, right? So,
When I came to Toccoa, I didn't consider myself a public speaker. And I took a class here in speech with a lady named Toby Unruh. She was a very pretty lady, and all the guys wanted to take her class. So, that was sort of a side deal. But anyway, she came to me and said, we're going to do an all-school play. I'd like for you to try out for one of the parts. I said, well. So I went and read, and she came and she said, you're going to be in this, and I did A Man Called Peter, and had that, and changed my whole standing on the stage with memorized lines and so forth. She is one of several persons, but her in particular changed my perspective about what maybe I could and couldn't do.
General Ashcroft, who's changed your perspective? You don't have to say me.
No, but I want to refer to a book and an author who sort of framed a Christian worldview in a way that has seemed to make sense to me for the last, say, 40, 50 years. And his name was Francis Schaeffer. And he helped me come to grips with what I felt was happening and do feel it's happening in the culture. And he wrote a number of books. I think the easiest and most understandable is, I think, Whatever Happened to the Human Race, which he wrote in conjunction with the Surgeon General of the United States named C. Everett Koop. But he wrote other books. The God Who Is There is his first sort of seminal work, but it's a lot more tough sledding than Whatever Happened. So I had a very kind of interesting little story about that. I one time was seated next to Billy Graham at a banquet, and he asked me, did I read any interesting books? And I said, yeah, I like this guy, Francis Schaeffer. He said, good, I'll have him give you a call sometime. So one time I was eating dinner and the phone rang, and all of a sudden my wife says, it's some guy named Francis Schaeffer wants to talk to you. It was very embarrassing because this Francis Schaeffer was a super well-known, high-powered philosopher. Right. And I had a mouthful of roast beef. It just didn't work out. But it was, he framed things. He put a template, if you will, maybe a set of perspectives in place that helped me make sense out of what I was seeing and thinking.
Good.
Can I just
take
on John's thought there, is that years ago, or years after that, Francis Schaeffer was sick. He had cancer, and he had been at the Mayo Clinic for final treatments. And he took a final tour of colleges like this. And for some reason, we got on the list because one of his children lived not far from the college where we were on the coast of California. So Francis and Edith Schaeffer showed up. You know, and I'm stunned because I'm like, John, this is an iconic person. Right. And we were sitting in my office. It's a humble office, and my wife asked Edith Schaeffer, who had also written books. She asked her, you have 5 children. How did you care for the children while you were doing all these other things? And her answer was, when it was inconvenient. Just those little insights. For me, for the person who touched me both academically and faith-wise, was a professor at the University of Illinois. I'm a young church planter. I'm 28 years old, and he's 16 years my senior. And he shows up in church one Sunday, and a guy comes running up to me afterwards, a small church, 100 people, whatever, comes running up and says, do you know who that was in the back row? I said, no. He said, that was the Howard Momstead. I said, fantastic. Who is the Howard Momstead? He said, he's one of the top 5 spectroscopists in the world. I said, fantastic. What's a spectroscopist? He said, that's an analytical chemist who uses light for scientific measurement. Long story short, he, in his faith journey, he had a nominal faith, came to a deeper faith. He asked me to come to a summer home and baptize him in Lake Michigan, which I was grateful to do. But one day we're going along in the car, and I said, Howard, how come you think God said, the first thing he says in Scripture is, let there be light? Why would he do that? And he was very gentle with me. It was this gentleness like Bob talked about. He didn't look at me like I had a third eye in my forehead, Bob. He said, well, it is one of the basic pieces of creation. I mean, it's what makes the world work. And if you're a farmer, you need light for the food chain. And if you're an artist, you need light for color. And if you're a watchmaker, light is the basis for measuring time. And if you're building roads, it's the most definitive measurement of distance. And so just and he brought together faith and academics in a profound, simple way, and it sort of supercharged my brain to ask different kinds of questions.
Good, thank you. Next question. Tell us about you first.
About myself?
Yes, tell us your name, where are you from?
Liam. I'm from Pickens.
All right, go ahead with it.
Dr. Robert Rhoden, I had a question. You were talking about basketball, and that reminded me of my biggest inspiration, John Morant. What's your biggest inspiration?
I'm sorry. I couldn't
Can you just repeat that one?
You were talking about basketball, and that reminded me of John Morant, my biggest inspiration. What would you say is your biggest inspiration?
Biggest inspiration.
Biggest inspiration.
Who is your biggest?
What's my biggest inspiration? You mean persons or just anything?
Yeah.
You know, when I'm alone, I like to sing to the Lord. I'm not a singer. I could never sing publicly and, and so forth. But I get inspired by singing, and when I read the Psalms, that's a huge inspiration to me as well. But if you talk to yourself, if you talk out loud, I think it's much better than just being. Well, there's a time to be quiet, but if I'm just listening to my own thoughts, that's all I hear. But if I'm speaking out loud, there are times when I will say things or sing to the Lord. That's one of the ways I get inspired. Sometimes you sing other people's songs.
Thank you.
My name is Chandler. I'm from Villa Rica, Georgia. I'm actually a freshman right now at TFC. This question is kind of to, I guess, just the three of you, but how did God speak to y'all when you decided to major, with what you decided to major?
How did God speak to you when you decided to? I'm sorry, the sound system is a little challenging up here.
In what way did God speak to the three of you in deciding what to major in college?
What to major in
Yeah, so
college?
how did God speak to you about what to major in college?
I was a freshman at Cal Berkeley. Because I was a stutterer, I thought maybe I was supposed to be in what we call vocational ministry because my dad was a pastor. But if you're a stutterer, you're saying those are long sermons. You don't want to go there. So I said, well, I'll be a doctor because they don't have to talk. They just cut on people. And so I went to Cal Berkeley, and my freshman year got 5 units of D in chemistry 1A. And God spoke to me. I ended up going to a missions because I was also running. I was in this confusion space that Bob was talking about in this last session, and I made the mistake of going to a missions conference, and the preacher preached like for an hour and a half, and he hadn't even showed his movies yet. And I'm thinking, oh boy. But I was convicted. There was something happening. I went up to this little chapel area, put down my Bible, and I'm not recommending this, but there were Venetian blinds, and there was a neon sign outside, and the strip of light fell across a verse in the Sermon on the Mount that said that you are the salt of the earth. If the salt has become tainted, how is the earth going to be salted? And it was like the Lord just went like that. And I transferred the next year and went to a college like this, and I never wanted to be a pastor. I couldn't think of anything more boring than being, a three-piece suit, golf on Tuesdays, help us, But as it worked out, that happened. It was okay. So these guys have better answers than that, but no?
I think so. There are experiences like Dick has talked about, but you also, there's the principle of motion. You start heading in a direction. You say, I'm thinking about ministry. You can't guide a car that's not moving. So as you move, and if it's not right, I think God will guide you away from it. I think you're in prayer. As you offer prayers to God, if peace starts to come inside about that, it's very important. And then ask other people. Don't discount what some other people might say about For me, people say, "Hey, you can do this." It was an important piece. Those are things, three things to think about as well.
Thank you. Next.
Yes, my name is Cole, and my occupation is I'm a student at CCS. And I guess it's to go for any of you guys, but like, what would you describe like the perfect leader? Like, what is the perfect leader?
What's the perfect leader look like to you?
I think everybody thinks of Jesus as the perfect leader. And the reason he did is that he pursued the most noble of all objectives. And it's hard to say anything that Jesus wanted to do that wasn't just the highest and best. And he was willing to put the objectives before his own interest. And I think when leaders subordinate let's just take it right down to politics right away. So we go from the highest example. If leaders put their personal interest in front of the public interest, they're bad leaders. But people who put the interests, the noble interests that God has called them to above other interests, and Jesus struggled with this. I mean, it wasn't easy. This is not a lead pipe cinch. You know, he's in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he says, look, if we can get out of this, let us out of this. But he says, ultimately, okay, not my will, but thine be done. So this noble objective, this purpose that has eternal value, transcends every personal reservation he would have had, and he moves forward toward it. That's kind of hard. And nobody in the history of the world has had the leadership impact of Jesus, because there has never, first of all, no one has given that much. So this idea of not allowing your personal interests to transcend the interests that you have in the pursuit of noble objectives really is something special, and it's something that's modeled best by the life of Jesus more than anything else that I know of.
Thank you. Next.
Hello, my name is Lara Ali Grudic, and I'm from Podgorica, Montenegro. I'm an international student in Toccoa Falls School, and my question for all three of you really is, what are some struggles you faced in your youth, and how do you think those struggles differ from struggles young people face today?
Forgive us because no, it's okay. The speaker's going a little bit out there, so I'm going to come over here, and then I can hear you and pass it on. Okay, so ask it again.
I know what she said.
Okay.
She said she's from Montenegro and she's a student here, and that we've all had struggles. And what struggles did we have in our youth that are different from the struggles that they have today?
Yes, thank you.
It's been 2 days like this for me. I just want you to know. It's been, you try to help someone, and this is what happens.
Pay attention to these students, man.
Thank you for trying.
Go ahead. It's all you then.
I didn't have many struggles when I was a kid. I mean, I had a good mom and dad, and I had meals I saw kids in my neighborhood or around who were struggling, who didn't have all the benefits. But, you know, you don't have to feel guilty if you had a good childhood. Now, this story, he can tell you stories that'll break your heart before he gets to the second chapter, with not knowing who his father was, and then thinking he had found his father and not being his father, and then that person being killed when he was 2 years old. What else could have gone wrong? I don't know, but not me. So I heard your question. Easy for me to answer. I didn't struggle much. I just went to school, did the best that I could. My parents didn't put a lot of pressure on me. My father said, I don't care if you do really well in school. He said, all I care about is whether you care, whether you do really well in school. And he wanted my attitude to be right, whether or not my achievement could be great. And I think that's really important. We worry about God's will. Sometimes we think, well, it's God's will for me to be in Georgia or in Ohio. it might be that it's geographic, but think about whether God's will might be, instead of locational, whether God's will is attitudinal, whether he wants you to have the right heart and the right spirit no matter where you are, and he might let you go wherever you want to, especially into that beautiful sea over there by Montenegro, which is one of the most charming parts of the world that's ever been known.
I think I had more struggles than John. When not as many as Bob, but more than John, I think. And
you look like it too.
Well,
I mean,
you know,
just look what it did to your hair.
I used to look like them, and now I look like this. I think when you're in your teens, and by the way, the word teenager was invented around 1950. Before that, you went from being a kid to being an adult. That's how that worked. And then we built teens in somewhere. But our whole, the structure of our lives, this whole, if the family works, that's a huge basis. If the family doesn't work, that's more of a challenge, because we get our identity from our family, who I am, right? And so I had pastor parents, missionary parents, and they started having challenges that I observed when I was in junior high. So what I was hearing wasn't necessarily what was being acted out at home, and that dissonance created a dissonance in me. And so I tried to start finding answers other places. I never got into drugs or that sort of thing, like so easy to do today. But there are other ways that you can sort of lose your mind besides getting into drugs. You're a teen, you're in puberty, so the sexual giant is growing in you, and you've got all these feelings and all that's in play. And so short answer to the question is, I don't think any of the challenges in terms of what makes human are different than the garden or post-garden, okay? I think those are in play all the time. I think the difference today is that when this thing came online in the mid-90s called the internet, it was the first generation in human history that did not have to go to an authority figure for information. And so I would hate to be a teacher today. I shouldn't say this, but I'd hate to be a teacher, because I'll say something and we're Googling it right away. We're going to fact check it with people we don't even know just to see if that's right? So the access to information when you're so young. I've got grandkids who are 5 years old who fix my television, right? I mean, that's that technology piece. That piece is the wild card. And that's why who you listen to becomes so critical. So short answer is, I don't think they're different, except for my access to information and therefore influence that muddies my world a lot. That's a good question, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next.
Hi, my name's Emma Grace, and I'm a student at Cherokee Christian. My question is for Mr. Ashcroft. In your opinion, how should young Christians view the confusion of the media and current politics?
I hope you heard that, because I'm not going to repeat it.
Yeah, I heard it, and she just, how should young people sort of respond given the media and politics the way it is? And I think that the availability of information today is made problematic by the fact that the reliability of information is substantially impaired. That we don't have what I think I would appreciate are sometimes sufficient neutrality in the provision of information. People who provide information that have an interest in what you do with the information tend to want to skew the information in a direction that'll move you toward to achieve their objectives. So I would try to, I guess, to try to verify the information you're getting. And one of the ways to verify information is to find out if it's consistent with information over time, and if it's consistent with your experience. I mean, there are such gross disparities between our experiences and what we are told sometimes that we should say, hey, wait a minute. I mean, we're told that there's not inflation. Wait a second. I mean, have you been to the grocery store or to the gas station or the like? And or people who say one thing at one moment and something else at another moment. Now, everybody's entitled to change his or her mind. But the idea that people allege that they are being consistent when there is really contradictory statements should erode and undermine our confidence in that source. So we have to be source critical in terms of making sure we have information from a source that's going to be willing to confess error and rectify errors. We have to be source consistent over time. And then I think you just have to try to be source verifying. Does it comport with reality? Very, very difficult. We have more information, but I think a lot of it is less reliable than it's ever been. And it's harder to make decisions. There's something that's said about the internet. I think is it GIGO? G-I-G-O, garbage in, garbage out. And we don't want to become computers that we're fed bad information and we get bad decision making. Your question's a good one. I think you have to be very critical about the information you're getting. You have to ask it to be consistent. You have to have, in terms of it, that it doesn't say one thing one time and something else another time. It doesn't have to be too skewed by the objectives of the people that are providing it. And you have to ask yourself, is it consistent with the reality that you're experiencing? Those are a couple of the ways that you begin to decide what the trusted sources are, and then you make your best judgments based on that information.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next.
My name is Noah Rainwater. I'm a dual enrolled student at Toccoa Falls College. I'm majoring in history and hoping to become a history professor. So my question is specifically to John Ashcroft. You mentioned you were a teacher for 5 years. What was your formal education, and what is the best advice you have for identifying and connecting with other people and your students?
I think I got, what kind of education did I have as preparation? I was a history major at Yale University. I wrote a substantial paper. It was, I think, 110 pages long in my senior year that related to American history, a group of miners in Western United States called the Western Federation of Miners. So I considered going into graduate work in regard to history, and was offered a job at a prep school in Massachusetts, but I decided to go to law school instead. So then I went to the University of Chicago Law School. I spent 3 years there at the University of Chicago Law School. And let me just say this, that law school will not teach you, quote, the law. If it does, it's not a very, there's no way to know, quote, know the law. I respect the man who appointed me, George W. Bush, appointed me as the Attorney General of the United States. When he did so, he said, he's a man who knows the law. And I thought to myself, oh gosh. The law, unfortunately, the law is so pervasive and substantial in this country that no one can just know the law. The law is almost two things. One, it's a way of analyzing. It's analysis. And the other thing is perhaps location. You know where to find the law, and you know how to read it with the right kind of critical approach to it to see if it fits circumstances that your particular situation demands. So my educational background was history, and then I went to law school. I was on my way to be in the Judge Advocate General's Corps of the United States Army when what is now Missouri State University contacted me and asked me if I'd like to teach business and labor law. And I decided, well, I think I would. It gave me a chance to go home and start living on the farm, which I still live on in southwest Missouri.
Thank you. Next.
Hi, my name is Hayden Hurst, and I'm a student at Cherokee Christian. And I was wondering what like an encouraging word you would say to someone who doesn't want to go to college, what would you say?
Oh, now everyone's looking at me. Okay.
Encouraging word.
Say it again.
An encouraging word to someone who doesn't want to go to college.
What is an encouraging word for a student who might not want to go to college?
Can I answer that?
He says, can I answer that? I'm not running the show, so I have to assume do I think he has the capacity to answer that question?
May I?
Now, how many of you think you'd like to hear from Dick on that question? Nobody. 12. Oh, wait.
12 people. Can I get a witness? Yeah. I think a fair percentage of young people today will not be trained in college or will not have the college experience. They will be trained by industry, whether it's Google or whatever it is. I like telling this story because some years ago, John and I and the former head of the Navy, Vern Clark, flew to the University of Virginia to do this, right, with students and then with business leaders. And one of the people who went with us, there were three of them. I wasn't in the mix. They were just there and we were interviewing him. One of them was Kurt Richardson, who is the co-founder of a company called OtterBox. Anybody know OtterBox? Yeah. And when we went out there, they said, we're not, well, I won't say what they said, but anyway. So Kurt was there, and in front of all these 200 business leaders at the country club, I got to interview these guys. And so I said, where I grew up, California, the question is the surf up? Now I'm in Colorado, and the question is, have you hiked a 14er? There are 54 peaks over 14,000 feet in Colorado. That's sort of the mark of being a real man or woman in Colorado, hike a 14er. But out on the East Coast, out here, the question is, what school did you graduate from? So I asked John, what school did you graduate from? He said, Yale University, University of Chicago Law School. I asked Vern Clark. He said, Evangel College, which is a school like this in Missouri, where his dad used to be president, and MBA, University of Arkansas. And I said to Kurt Richardson, Kurt, it's my understanding you never went to one day of college. This is $1 billion corporation, OtterBox. Not one day. And he said, that's right. I said, didn't we fly here in your jet? And they kind of like that answer. And the point is this, that there are lots of different ways to be trained. University and college is one of them. I happen to like college, but my son Chris didn't learn that way. He's a kinesthetic learner, and now he's the CEO of a $13 million company, but it took him a while to get there. So I'm just saying I would love the college experience for a person for a whole range of reasons, including the connection with mentors and leaders and that sort of thing, but that the track to doing something with your life doesn't always run through college.
Can I add something, Dick, on
You may. You have permission.
The question sort of is an either-or question. Do you go to college or not?
Yeah.
And I think more now we can partake in both of these worlds.
Yep.
That the educational offerings don't require us to make irrevocable choices ab initio or from the beginning. Lots of people work for a year, get into the college situation, join their educational experience with a vocational experience. A lot of companies are helping people go back. So we get preparation that is both industrial and related to OJT or on-the-job training that's consistent with and contemporaneous with. So either or, it may be a fork in the road. What was it Yogi Berra said, when you come to the fork in the road, take it?
Take it, yeah.
Well, maybe you can take them both and try, and if you don't like something like Chris, his son, yeah, well, okay, maybe I should be doing something else. But you never know. Sometimes later in life, people go back and pick up things on the basis of, if nothing else, the idea that they just enjoy the process, the give and take, and the mental, spiritual exploration that comes in a setting where you're in a community of learners.
Thank you. Next.
Hi, my name's Eli. I'm from Hiram, Georgia, and this question is for General Ashcroft. So, you know, especially nowadays, it's the Christian worldview is becoming less and less prevalent. So I was just wondering, what was it like to be in a U.S. government position while holding a Christian worldview?
You know, I don't think it's as, you know, a Christian worldview is a pretty solid place to be. You understand that God is a creator. It'll provide a basis for your respect for humanity that no other worldview will. I mean, if you don't think that God is the creator, you have to, we're almost at the place where you think that life is accidental. So if we're all a big accident, came into existence accidentally, and will someday there'll be another big accident that extinguishes us all, I don't see how that really is a basis for more effective governance. I think the basis for effective governance is understanding how special it is that we're created by a knowing, intelligent God, and that we have purpose. And so if we do things that enhance the purpose, the achievement potential, the opportunity environment for human beings, giving them the dignity of making choices and being responsible for their choices and elevating themselves in their community based on it, that's a wonderful thing. So it's not, to me, it's not a disadvantage at all to have a Christian worldview, meaning, if I mean by that, that God created us and that he has purpose for us. Wow, that's the kind of person I want in office. And when there are people, though, who just, you know, say, well, how in the world can you possibly be a Christian in politics? I'd say, how in the world can you not? I just think it's great to understand that we are a product of God's own handiwork, and that he is, because we are, I put a lot of emphasis on this idea that we're made in his image. And because I think that means that doing godly things fit inside of us, that we'll be most comfortable. There'll be the least dislocation in our lives and in our persons. We'll have the greatest harmonic sort of cooperation between what we're doing and what we ought to be doing if we're so. And I think that's I don't know that there is a false impression that's created by some people skeptical in the media that there is disrespect for Christianity or for spirituality. Let me be more generalized in public service than there really is. I'll tell you one little quick anecdote. I was on with President Bush in Philadelphia. We had a news conference about the restraint of gun violence, because the number one priority of the Bush administration when I first went into office before the terrorist attacks were to reduce gun violence. And we chose to reduce gun violence by punishing gun violators. And we actually drove, all the statistics indicate we had at the lowest level incidence of guns used in crimes in history. So we were up there having a news conference in Philadelphia, and we wanted to go, after the news conference, we were going over to see the Cardinal of the Catholic Church. And I'm riding along in the limousine, you know, the big deal that's designed to resist the gunshots and all that, sitting in the back seat with the president. The president looks over at me and he says, "Ashy?" And I said, "Yes." You know, when the president talks to you, I don't know, just intimidating to me. I spend a lot of time with him. Every day I've spent time with him, but he says, "Ashy, I hear you're having prayer meetings over there at the Justice Department." I'm thinking, yes, sir. Before work every morning, we have a little group that comes in. He looked at me and said, "Keep it up." So, I mean, you know, I think, you know, it's not like it. If I were viewed as being persecuted, it was by the media. I don't think there were other people that, if they were persecuting me, they weren't doing a very good job of it. So I didn't feel persecuted. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Next. I'm coming closer, so we got you.
Okay. My name's Emma, and I'm from Franklin County High School. And friendship. Okay, so friendship is the deepest relationships that humans can have was mentioned, and this is something I've struggled with, like in the past, and I'm sure many youth have as well. But how do you continue to, how did you continue to spiritually, follow your calling, while continuing to have to manage your friendships with other people?
So how do you follow your calling while managing the friendships with other people in your life?
Well, Proverbs talks about if you hang out with wise people, you'll be wise. So I think it's important to hang out with people that share your values, not just your interest. So we can have the same interests, but maybe not the same values. Because if I go to a baseball game with you and I like baseball, but my friend doesn't care for baseball, or if we go there and if our values are different, if I while I'm there, he starts doing things that I'm not comfortable with, we may have a common interest if we both like baseball, but your values are different. I think you can share interest without compromising your values. That's what I'm trying to say. I was sort of stumbling a bit there and getting that across. But you can share interest with your friends, but you don't have to compromise your values. And yes, that's an important piece.
You know, this business about following Jesus, to me, has become more profound the older I get. And that my experience with following Jesus is that, and I put that in the category of calling, right? Because he says, follow me. That's what he says. He didn't say, raise your hand. He didn't say, quote, make it as, all those things are good, but that's not, he said, follow me. When I read him and I start following him, I start finding other people who follow him. That's just a natural deal. And I have this sort of thought that I've come up with. I mentioned it this morning. If you follow Jesus, he takes you places you never dreamed you could go. He gives you ideas you never thought you could have, and he gives you friends that last forever. So I'm going along sort of dumb and happy following Jesus, and I'm only 8 years old, but I gave what I understood of my 7-year-old life, I gave it to Jesus, as much as I could understand of him, when I was 7. The year before I met John. Then I meet John, and now we've been hanging out for 72 years, hither and yon. And then some years later, I meet Bob. And so we're 56 years, we're in friendship. I think because Jesus loves the entire world, because he has total compassion for every individual, if you follow him, you'll bump into people that he introduces you to, if I can put it that sort of way. And whether they are Jesus followers or not is not the point, and I think Bob's speaking to that. When I first went to D.C., the chaplain in the United States Senate was a fellow named Richard Halverson. He died 3 years later, but we were sitting in the Senate dining room, and we were having a conversation about Jesus and friendship. And he had this comment. He said, Dick, if you're a Jesus follower, and you make a friend. Let's say I meet Fred Farkle over here. And Fred Farkle is a terrible person, but I just sort of like him. Even if he's terrible, I kind of like him. And if you become friends, he automatically starts following Jesus, whether he knows he's following Jesus or not. That was a new thought for me, because if he hangs with you, he's going to have whatever influence you have. He may not have an intellectual understanding in his head. He may not have that piece, but there's something about Jesus and friendship that automatically goes together from my perspective. So,
thank you.
And
Next, and then we've got one more question. Oh, go ahead, please.
Something in on it. This isn't a tough deal. I think this is a complex question, and so I throw this out for you. The balance between, because Jesus was criticized for hanging out with the wrong people. And yet you get to places like one of my favorite Psalms is the first Psalm. Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. How blessed you will be if you don't embrace the ways of the world, sitting in the seat of the scornful, standing for things that the sinners stand for. And yet Jesus never did that, but he didn't disassociate himself from the people who were needy, and he didn't first ask them, you have to become a Christian. When blind Bartimaeus yells at him, he responds to him. And when Zacchaeus, remember the children's song, Wee Little Man, Zacchaeus was in the tree, he calls and says, hey, I'll come to your house. So this is an understanding. You don't want to reserve yourself only to sequester yourself away from, you're in the world but not of the world, I guess is the way we say it. And that was Jesus. And I think that's so be loving and kind to everyone, but be careful not to embrace the lifestyle or even the philosophy that others have if it's anti-Christian.
Our last two questions. Go ahead.
So this is probably in nature more directed to General Ashcroft, but as a leader, how do you stay in control of yourself and the situation when it is kind of all falling apart?
I'm not sure I understand. How do I maintain control of myself and the situation?
When it's falling apart.
Yeah, well, I don't control situations. It's very difficult to control situations. You have to do your best to, first of all, it's more noble to control yourself than it is to control the situation. And you'll never really succeed in controlling situations if you're trying to control situations without controlling yourself. I think there was a confusion, not confusion, but Confucius said it's more noble to change yourself than to change the world. It's hard to change yourself, but God will help you change yourself first. And then if you work with God's help to have a resolution in the world, that's good. But a lot of people of tremendous impact and value weren't able to control the situation. And the heroes that I mentioned as leaders this morning, Jesus didn't control the world. He gave himself for the world. Abraham Lincoln didn't, there were incredible dislocations, losses of life and everything, but Lincoln maintained a sense of purity in terms of his own commitments and his own decency and what he should be doing. Martin Luther King didn't succeed in controlling the situation, but he maintained through going to prison and never, at least from my perspective, my understanding, not abandoning his understanding of what God was calling him to do and how God was calling him to do it. So even if you read these letters from the Birmingham jail or other documents, these were profoundly sacrificial items where he said, circumstances may be beyond me, and I don't have the ability or the right to expect to be able to control circumstances, but I have the responsibility and the opportunity with God's help to control myself. And sometimes when people do that, God intervenes miraculously. Sometimes the miracle doesn't even happen until after they're gone.
Thank you. Last question. It's all you. Wrap it up for us.
All right, let's do it. My name's Gavin. I'm a senior at Tallulah, and I got a question for my friend Dr. Robert I met earlier. As I've gotten older, I've realized more challenges you face, skill sets you try and acquire, whether it's hobby, social, whatever. and I was wondering what's a skill set you're still working on today?
So he recognizes there are a lot of different skill sets he's trying to develop now as a student. What skill set are you working on still today?
It's a really good question because, the way you know a person is old is if they stop learning. So my new skill sets today is we've just opened up a website. I've never had a website in my life. But a guy came to me and he said, I think you ought to have a website. And it's the way you could communicate with the world. And then somebody else said, you ought to do a podcast. So I have a couple of emails right now working on putting together a podcast. I'm behind the curve on some of that. But those are the kinds of things in terms of technical skill sets. Not that I will know how to technically do all that stuff, but hopefully learn how to use it in a way that's going to be helpful. And one of the things I work on even now is in terms of memory. I'm trying to memorize certain verses. I read through the Bible every year. Right now I'm in the book of Acts, and I read through it 3 chapters a day. And so as I come to certain verses, I try to note those and work on my memory. So those are just some of the things I'm working on right now.
Thanks. Will you all please join me in thanking these 3 guys for being here today? And we want to thank all of you for being here today. Before we leave, we have one more thing we want to do. I want to tell you a quick story. In 2017, General Ashcroft was a commencement speaker here, and we were sitting on the stage, and he said to me, do you guys have a school song? And I said, we do, but I don't really like it. So you heard him play the piano this morning. A couple weeks later, I get from him an email with a song he wrote for Toccoa Falls College. We've never done it publicly before. It's to the tune of a hymn that you probably know. We've asked Professor Grant Wall, who's one of our worship arts professors, and some of our music folks back here. They're going to lead us for the first time ever singing John Ashcroft's song for Toccoa Falls College. You'll see the words up on the screen, so if you'll go ahead and put those up there. And we are going to turn it over to you, Grant. Please stand and let's sing it with us as we celebrate this, thanking John Ashcroft. What? The tune is, Oh, for 1,000 Tongues. Okay, some of you remember that.
In unity we learn of Thee, O Father, Spirit, Son, for service, faith, and knowledge, our journey we will run. Toccoa Falls enriches all our bodies, minds, and souls. O God above, we pray in love, conform us to your goals. Compassion from the heart of God will point us to the lost. The sacrificial mind of Christ will lead us to his cross. The Holy Spirit's gentle power sustains us on our way to serve in concert with your will till that eternal day.
Thank you. General Ashcroft, thank you. Appreciate it. We are so grateful. I hope we see a lot of you as students here, and I look forward to getting to know you. Thank you for being here today. We are dismissed.